Hello, everyone. It's Joe Waxman. Uh, Today, I wanted to talk about um, an interesting idea, which I don't really hear very much of, about, especially in the astrological community, about how does astrology work? And I pose a question here, is astrology magic? Um, I want to look at that in this talk. Um, so if we're talking about like the big planets, the sun, the moon, it's obvious that we can make some case about their influence on us. You know, we feel the sun's light, we see the moon at night, we know the moon affects the tides, so there's definite biological, physical correlation there that we can tie into. Um, but when we get to some of the outer planets, it becomes harder to justify how the planets influence us. And often in astrology, we tie into mythology with the planets to sort of parallel their significations and meanings. Um, you know, Saturn having to do with Kronos, and there's a whole mythology tied into that, and we draw some parallels there. Mars and Aries, the god of war, Jupiter or Zeus. There's whole different, there's tons of different mythologies, and I don't want to get too deep into that part. I just bring it up because it's important to separate the magical thinking from reality. And here I'm creating a differentiation. Magical thinking being something that's not tied to reality, um, delving into fantasy realms of thought versus real magic, which I haven't even gotten to describe yet, which is something totally different, but I just want to separate those two things. There tends to be, I would say there is a lot of magical thinking in astrology because it just lends itself to that. Sometimes you hear about a case for astrologers making a case for astrology being a science, but I'm not sure that's a good idea because maybe this is my Uranian qualities, Uranus conjunct ascendant, not wanting to be a part of the group. But science is very, modern sciences are based in measurements. And I think that's the qualifying factor, whatever you can have empirical measurements for, you know, that can have a very strong, you know, what am I saying? That everyone can agree upon, measurements that are objective, right? Versus the subjective nature of astrology. For instance, astronomy is a science. Astrology is so subjective that it, you know, people are going to disagree about the influence of Saturn or Uranus or ruling planets or things like that. And that's why it's not really a science in the same way that other sciences that we call, what we call science, and how we define that, because of the ability to measure and have objective consensus agreement about these things. So I don't think astrology is a science. Therefore, what is it? And how does it work? Right? I mean, there's certainly on one side of things, scientists might just brush it off, say it's fantasy, you know. But astrologers know that it's not fantasy. There is definitely a huge influence going on. And one of the foundational beliefs in astrology is that the planets are influencing us, and even the asteroids are influencing us, and even points points in the sky, mathematical points in the sky are influencing us, like the nodes, right? And that stars, thousands of light years away are influencing us. And we're taking into consideration, we're believing, belief is a huge factor in astrology. I'm going to get to that. We're believing that all these things are influencing us, but we don't really fully understand how. So there's a lot of assumptions in astrology that lends itself heavily to magical thinking, these assumptions, these unfounded assumptions, ungrounded assumptions. And I'm not trying to dismiss astrology. I'm just trying to separate the magical thinking versus the reality. And the reality can be magic. That's the thing. That's the case I'm proposing, the question I'm asking. I'm not saying definitely this is astrology is magic, but I'm saying I think astrology is magic, and here's why. Well, what is magic? Right? Magic is not magical thinking. Magical thinking is fantasy, not reality, not truth. Magic, however, ties into belief, and it ties into the psychic nature of our mind, of our brain, these brains right here that we have. What we believe to be true, we create in reality, especially when there's consensus agreement about what we believe in. There's a creation, there's something created when we fully believe in something that tends to reflect back to us in reality. For instance, take the media, for example. When the media colludes around a story, that whether it's true or false, and people who are good at seeing through the veils can usually see the falsehoods. I consider myself one of those people, and I know there are many others, but for most people, they cannot see through the veils of illusion, and they fully believe that the colluded stories the media creates, and therefore that is their reality. It creates a reality. The consensus reality, the consensus belief, the psychic power of a whole lot of people believing certain things creates that. And in more than a way that's just for them, it's reality. It creates a powerful psychic field that gets reflected back upon everyone, right? I mean, think about, okay, I don't want to go into too many details, but you can fill in the blanks, right? So, back to the planets in mythology. We tend to just take for granted that the mythologies around certain planets have so much to do with their influence upon us, but the planets existed a long time before the mythologies were ever created. And a lot of the mythologies were created before humanity ever was aware of these planets. For instance, the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, we have associations with them. And some people would argue that these associations are very loosely connected to the planets. I would argue the opposite, that magically they're very connected to the planets. For instance, I heard recently in a talk, somebody said that Neptune's nothing like the mythological god of Neptune, of the sea god Neptune. He's not angry and rapey and all that. But what's interesting is that, first of all, Neptune was created far before the mythology was ever, created. Neptune was a planet. It's a huge planet, and it was there for millions, billions of years. I don't know how long before human beings were ever on this planet. So eventually, humanity evolved, and we created this mythology somewhere about Neptune, the god of the sea, and then eventually humanity discovered Neptune, the planet, the outer planet, and then they put these two things together. They called this planet Neptune, and they tied the mythology to the planet the way the ancients tied their mythologies to the planets that they could observe with the naked eye, right? All the planets up to Saturn they could see with the naked eye, and they tied in their mythologies to those planets. But after a certain point in the modern era, it became very the ties to mythology to planets became looser and looser. It wasn't so much of a consensus agreement as it was the person who discovered the planet got to name it. So it's like one person tying the mythology to a planet or a planetary body, asteroid, and thereby creating the meaning for everyone. What's really interesting here is that some people would say, well, Neptune doesn't really have anything to do, the planet Neptune doesn't really have that much to do with the mythology. They say Neptune's not angry and Neptune doesn't rape people. And I would say, well, actually, I would disagree with that. And here's where the magic part comes in, not the magical thinking, the actual magic. There's real magic here. Why? In the mythology, they say Neptune rapes people. Well, what is Neptune's influence on people? You ever seen an alcoholic or a drug addict? How bad off are they? Like really? Like I've seen an alcoholic. I've lived with an alcoholic at one time. Well, almost lived with him, basically lived with him. I was up close and personal with a real alcoholic. Let's put it that way. I've seen drug addicts. I've seen documentaries about drug addicts. You know what? That's all Neptunian. And I'd say that's pretty rapey. If you ask me, that's pretty darn rapey of Neptune. That's Neptune full on raping people. And that happens all the time. It's not pretty. And that fits the mythology. And that's the magic part, not the magical thinking. That's the actual magic part. And Uranus was also discovered later, and so was Pluto. But they fit the archetypes, they fit the mythologies that we name them after. And what about the smaller asteroids, like Chiron? Chiron is also mythological being that we tied to this planetoid asteroid, this weird shaped icy asteroid that is almost part comet and part asteroid that they don't really know. It's misshapen and it's very Chironic. It's very like the mythology. Point is, we imagine that these planets influence us, but at the same time, we have this kind of arrogant assumption that 7 billion people on this planet cannot influence the planets, right? Planets are influencing us, but we have nothing to do with them. Okay, so let me propose something. What if our collective belief, consensus belief, psychic power, our collective psychic power is reflected to the planets and back onto us, right? Why not? Why do we assume that these planets are so powerful they're influencing our whole lives, yet we have no influence on them? As far as I know, planets do not have brains. We have brains. Brains are powerful, right? I would say that planets have souls. I think they're very evolved beings. I think that planets are, you know, when somebody reaches like the highest stage of evolution on Earth or somewhere else, after that they can go and be planets. They could probably do a whole bunch of different things as well, but these are the equivalent of what we would call ascended masters. They're post-ascended masters. They are ascended masters. So their level of consciousness is extremely evolved, and I believe that. I believe these are beings. I believe these are highly powerful beings. The equivalent of gods, the plural, not God, the singular, gods, the plural. So I believe planets are gods, right? In that sense, that they are the very, very, very evolved, highly ascended beings. But they do not have brains, right? We have brains, and that's what's unique about human beings. And if you can imagine that the consciousness of these planets is in tune and aware with our consciousness. They're connecting with us as we're connecting with them. You know, it's not just this one way where they're influencing us and we're not, you know, at the same time influencing them. We are. It's at an unconscious level, right? They are conscious of what's happening. That's why they can reflect back our own psychic projections onto them back at us, right? And it works. Even, it's like if you shine a flashlight in a mirror, it doesn't only shine back at you, it shines back at everyone. So our psychic projections of what these planets are is reflecting back on all of humanity. That's why we can look at somebody and be like, oh, that's a Capricorn right there. Oh, there's a Leo, definitely. You know, because our psychic understanding of what these planets and signs are doing is being reflected back on everyone, right? Take, for instance, the 30-degree perfect zodiac that we've created. Do you think God, the singular, created that? Really? I don't think so. I think we created that, and we projected that into the heavens and reflected back on us. I don't think the heavens are neatly divided into 30-degree portions. I don't think it works that way. I think we created that and it reflected back. Yeah, there's divine harmony in it. Yeah, there's something universal about the number 12, but there's not something universal about our planets. You go to any other solar system, the billions or trillions, I don't even know, they're just the endless solar systems everywhere, and this galaxy and the trillions of other galaxies, they're going to have all different formations, you know? And we try and pretend or imagine or project that our solar system is a universal solar system, right? And that's sort of like this small-minded, myopic view that, like, you know, we're the center of the universe. There are beings everywhere in this universe, and they also are going to, if they're evolved enough, which many of them are, I know that, I believe that. They're going to have their own form of astrology, and they're going to have to make sense of it with the planets that they got. And it's, in some sense, I don't want to say it's random, but it's definitely not sort of divinely created in some like perfect order. We have to make order out of disorder, and that's one of the beauties of you know, astrology that takes into account our planetary solar system. It's not purely universal. There are universal archetypes. Universal archetypes are the numbers, right? We can draw meaning out of the number 1, or out of the number 2, or out of the number 3, and it's going to be the same no matter where we go in the whole entire universe. These are universal archetypes. Universal archetypes do exist. But what's not universal are our planets and their significations. We have this, you know, Jupiter, for example, is a gas giant, but not every solar system is going to have a Jupiter, right? What then? How do you make an astrology without Jupiter, or without a Saturn, or with some other planet that just is in a completely different, you know, paradigm or order of things? It's just different. It's just different, right? Maybe there's less planets. Maybe some solar systems only have like 6 planets total. Maybe their sun is different. Maybe they have a binary sun, right? What then? Maybe their sun is a giant, like you know, some of the stars are way bigger than our sun. What then? Or maybe it's smaller. Maybe it's a brown dwarf. Or maybe they're, you know, who knows? Like, there's so many different variations. And that's why we can't pretend that our version of astrology is a universal astrology. It's not. It's unique to the physical existence of our solar system. Just like we have unique bodies, right? Each one of us individuals has a unique body. It's not the same. Our body is not a universal body. There's some things that are universal about it, but there's much more that is, you know, just completely unique to us. So I can't pretend that I'm like the you know, the universal, my personality is a universal personality. It's not universal. And just our astrology is not universal either. And that's why it's the way it's working has everything to do with our own psychic projections being reflected back on us. I believe this, and I'm not saying this is exactly the way it is. I'm saying this is how I see it. And I pose that question to you, that when somebody goes, when a scientist discovers a new asteroid and they say, I'm going to call this blah, 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 after this, you know, okay, like the Sedna was one of them. It's far off, dwarf planet, I believe, in the Oort cloud. And then they named it after, you know, this Native American mythology, where it, you know, it had to do with, it's a whole thing. I'm not going to go into it, but Sedna basically became god of the sea, I think, and she's like deep in the oceans, and Sedna's far off, far off. So there's some parallels there, right? But do we really think that that the Native Americans were tapping into this dwarf planet when they created the mythology of Sedna, and that these scientists were just intuitive enough to connect the two things? Or, I mean, that just seems implausible to me. And we're doing this again and again and again. You know how many asteroids there are in our solar system? You know, every single one is just like these scientists were just so spot on. They just got it. Like, why? I mean, if there's these scientists are so spot on, why aren't they winning the lottery? Why aren't they getting the you know, picking the lucky numbers? Because that's the same odds. It doesn't make sense. And I would challenge anyone to prove me otherwise, prove me wrong. You know, how are these scientists really matching these two things together? If you get what I'm saying, they're not. What's far more likely is that what I said, that all these space beings have evolved consciousness. These are conscious beings, and they aren't in touch. They're far more aware of us than we are of them, right? That's the irony of astrology. We think that we're discovering these planets. Well, I think these planets have discovered us way before we discovered these planets. And they were just waiting, you know, waiting for us to grow and evolve enough to communicate, because it's a relationship. And I think that's what we have to remember. Astrology is a relationship. We are relating to these planets. And when we cast our projections onto those planets, they're reflecting that back as much as they can. You know, they provide the hardware, we provide the software. That's the way I like to think of it, because I mean, you know, we have to take into account the physicality of the body, the actual astronomy of these bodies, right? You know, Mercury is a hot planet. It's very close to the sun. It's hard. It spins very fast. So we have to take all these things into account. Uranus spins with a horizontal axis, so the rings are vertical. Looks like, you know, the rings are spinning vertically, and you know, that I believe was influencing the punk rock movement, because it basically timed itself exactly with the official release of punk rock in 1976, with its ingress into Scorpio, where it's exalted. And I believe it's exalted. Why do I believe it's exalted in Scorpio? Because that's what people say, and that's what makes sense. And that's how astrology works, right? We make an observation, we come to a consensus agreement, and the planet agrees, basically. The planet, you know, verifies that. So yeah, and then, you know, in the 76, when punk came out, people donned the mohawk, symbol of Uranus, with its vertical rings, right? So there's a relationship here between us, our psychic projections, and the planets and their consciousness. It's a bridge, okay? And this is magic, right? This is what I'm calling magic. This is what I believe magic really is. It's about our human psychic nature. We have this psychic nature. We are all psychic. And I wanted to make a separate video about how we're all psychic, but it's coming up here in this one, and I may still do that. But we have psychic power, and individually our psychic power is not that great unless we are one of those ascended masters, right? Unless we are, you know, the spirit of the sun, or the spirit of Jupiter, the soul of Jupiter, the soul of Saturn. Then we have a very powerful psychic nature, or we are just a very highly evolved, enlightened being. But individually, our psychic nature is not very strong. Collectively, our psychic nature is very, very powerful. Humanity's collective belief is extremely, extremely powerful. And that's why it's very important what we believe as a collective, psychic, human family. It's very important, and it's very important to have, you know, like the positive psychic projections about things and about this and about that, and to be aware of our own psychic potential, our own psychic nature. This is magic. This is how magic works. You get a bunch of people to believe something, it's a creation, right? And the media actually knows this, and they're manipulating us. And propaganda's, you know, the propagandists, the state propagandists know this, because actually the people who have been controlling the world for the last thousands of years are occultists. And occultists deal with this. They deal with magic. And that's how they manipulate people. And that's how they get their way, is by getting the masses to believe things. And that creates what they want. So they manipulate people through the media, through propaganda, through movies, through music, through images, through all of these things. They're masters at manipulating, and masters at producing images in our brains that has the sleeping masses thinking in a certain way, but collectively it produces this powerful magic, right? Astrology is magic. Astrology is creating a consensus belief, not out of everyone, because not everyone believes in astrology, but out of enough people that projects onto the planets, planets project it back onto all of us, everyone. We are creating astrology. That's really important to understand. We create astrology. And so when you get into these arguments about, oh, the ancient astrology was the right one and the new astrology is the wrong one, or this astrology is right and that astrology is wrong, that's all nonsense. That's why all the astrologies actually work. If you go to any big astrological field, you know, Chinese astrology, Japanese astrology, Vedic astrology, Western astrology, modern astrology, ancient astrology, they all work, right? That's why they work, because there's enough people putting out in the psychic field that can reflect back on everyone. And you just have to tap into that field, that psychic field. Because I actually studied originally Japanese astrology, and then I got into, which is called 9-star key. And then I got into 4 pillars, and then I got into Vedic, and then I got into Western, or Vedic Western around the same time. But they all work. They really, really work. So I don't buy into any of this argument like this is the right astrology, that's the wrong astrology, or this is the right zodiac, that's the wrong zodiac. They all work. They work in different ways. And we have to learn to think in shades of gray rather than black and white. Everyone likes black and white thinking, but that's low-level thinking. High-level thinking is shades of gray, right? So if you want to develop your thinking, learn to see and think in shades of gray, right? It's consensus agreement. And when, which house system works, which house system is the right system. Well, it's like seeking a second opinion. Like, you go to one doctor, he says you have cancer. You go to another doctor, he says you don't. You go to a third, and he's like, well, you might have cancer or something like that. Or you don't have cancer, or you do have cancer, whatever he says. But you're seeking out different opinions, and it's shades of gray. And when you have consensus, that's when it's firm. And when you have disagreement, that's when it's not firm. It's just like half and half, right? So astrology is magic, okay? That's my answer to the question, is astrology magic? You don't have to believe me, but I'm gonna sow these seeds, and they'll produce whatever fruit or trees or plants that they produce in whoever listens to this. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks, guys. Bye.